You're standing in line at Target on December 23rd. You've got a cart full of stuff you're not even sure the recipients want: a scented candle, a picture frame, a kitchen gadget your mother-in-law will open, smile politely at, and then shove into the back of a cabinet where it'll live until she moves or dies. You're checking your phone calculator between aisles, trying to figure out if you can actually afford all this. The credit card is already groaning under the weight of Black Friday, but you keep shopping because that's what you do at Christmas. Except here's what nobody tells you about that ritual: you're not just spending money, you're actively destroying wealth. Every single year, Americans collectively burn billions of dollars in economic value through a process so inefficient that if any business operated this way, they'd be bankrupt within a quarter. Welcome to the Deadweight Loss of Christmas, the annual wealth destruction festival nobody wants to talk about. My name is Alex, and I've spent the better part of a decade studying how ordinary people make financial decisions that seem perfectly reasonable in the moment, but turn out to be spectacularly destructive when you look at the actual numbers. And nothing, and I mean nothing, illustrates this phenomenon better than Christmas gift giving. If you're serious about understanding where your money actually goes and why you feel broke every January, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Because what I'm about to show you is going to fundamentally change how you think about the entire holiday season. Here's the thesis: Christmas gifts don't just cost money, they destroy it. And I can prove it with math. Back in 1993, an economist named Joel Waldfogel published a research paper that should have changed everything. It was called The Deadweight Loss of Christmas. The title alone should have been a warning shot across the bow of the entire retail industry. Waldfogel did something remarkably simple. He surveyed college students about the gifts they'd received. He asked them two questions. First, how much do you think the person who gave you this gift paid for it? Second, how much would you have paid for it yourself if you were buying it with your own money? The results were devastating. On average, recipients valued gifts at only 80% of what the giver actually spent. That means for every $100 spent on gifts, $20 of value just vanished into thin air. Not lost, not transferred, destroyed. Now let's scale that up. Americans spend approximately $900 billion on holiday gifts every single year. That's not a typo, 900 billion. If 20% of that value is destroyed in the transaction, we're talking about $180 billion in pure economic waste every December. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of Hungary. That's twice the amount the federal government spends on food stamps in an entire year. We're burning the equivalent of a mid-sized European economy just to give people stuff they value less than what we paid. But here's where it gets worse. That 20% figure, that's the average. The actual deadweight loss varies wildly depending on the gift. Cash has zero deadweight loss. You give someone $50, they receive exactly $50 of value. Gift cards are close, maybe 5 to 10% loss because of fees and unredeemed balances. But specific items? That's where the destruction really kicks in. Clothing can have a 30 to 40% deadweight loss because sizing and style preferences are so personal. Novelty gifts? We're talking 50 to 70% loss. That singing fish plaque you thought was hilarious? You paid $30. The recipient would have paid maybe $10 for it, and that's being generous. More likely, they'd pay $0 because they don't want a singing fish on their wall. The psychology behind this is fascinating and depressing in equal measure. We engage in what economists call obligatory exchange. You buy gifts not because you've identified something the recipient genuinely needs or wants, but because social pressure demands it. Your coworker gives you a gift. Now you have to reciprocate. Your aunt sends something to your kids. You have to send something back. The entire system operates on a network of forced transactions where nobody is actually optimizing for value. We're optimizing for social signaling. The gift isn't about transferring utility. It's about demonstrating that you remembered, that you care, that you're part of the relationship network, and that creates a perverse incentive structure. If the goal is to signal thoughtfulness, you can't just give cash. Cash feels impersonal, even though it's literally the most efficient transfer of value possible. So instead, you spend hours shopping for something specific, something that shows you put in effort, which means you're deliberately choosing inefficiency to prove you care. It's like hiring someone to dig a hole and then fill it back in just to demonstrate you have money to spend on labor. The effort itself becomes the point, regardless of whether it creates any actual value. Now, I know what you're thinking. But Alex, you can't put a price on the joy of giving, the smile on someone's face when they open a present, the holiday spirit, the magic of it all. And look, I get it. I'm not saying emotional value doesn't exist. But here's the thing. We're confusing two completely different experiences. There's the joy of receiving something you actually want. And then there's the performance of gratitude. Most of the smiles you see on Christmas morning, those are customer service smiles. Those are the faces people make when their coworker brings homemade cookies to the office. And they're aggressively terrible. But you can't say that, so you smile and say they're great. We've all been on both sides of that transaction. The real magic happens in your brain, not in the economy. The emotional satisfaction you get from giving a gift, that's real. That's a genuine psychological reward. But that reward exists independently of whether the gift was economically efficient. You'd get the exact same emotional benefit from giving someone cash, or a gift card, or funding their 5029 college savings account. The warm, fuzzy feeling comes from the act of giving, not from the act of guessing what someone wants and getting it wrong 20% of the time. We've just been conditioned to believe that cash is somehow less meaningful, which is nonsense when you think about it for more than 30 seconds. Cash is pure optionality. It's the gift of choice. It's saying I value your judgment about what you need more than I trust my own guess. But the deadweight loss is only part of the problem. There's also the timing issue. Christmas gifts concentrate spending in a way that's financially catastrophic for most households. You're not spreading this consumption across the year. You're cramming it into 6 weeks between Thanksgiving and New Year's, which means you're making purchase decisions under time pressure, often without the ability to comparison shop or wait for sales outside the artificial Black Friday window. You're buying in a seller's market during peak pricing with limited inventory, and because everyone else is doing the same thing, you can't even use scarcity as a decision filter. The mall is chaos. The websites are crashing. You're just grabbing whatever looks approximately right and moving on. And then there's the debt. Oh man, the debt. The average American carries roughly $6,000 in credit card debt, and a significant portion of that gets added in November and December. Because you can't show up empty-handed, right? You can't be the person who didn't get gifts. So you buy stuff you can't afford for people who don't really want it, using money you don't have, at interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. Credit card interest averages around 20%, so that $100 gift you put on plastic, if you're making minimum payments, it's going to cost you $120 to $120 by the time you pay it off. Now, you're not just destroying $20 through deadweight loss, you're destroying another $20 to $40 in interest payments. Congratulations. That $100 gift generated maybe $80 in value but cost you $140. You've achieved a 57% loss rate. That's worse than gambling. Let's talk about what happens to all these gifts after the initial exchange. The scented candle sits on a shelf, gets lit once, and then forgotten. The kitchen gadget goes into the cabinet and never emerges. The clothing doesn't fit quite right, so it goes unworn, and eventually, maybe 6 months later, maybe 2 years later, all this stuff ends up in one of 3 places: donated to Goodwill, thrown in the trash, or listed on Facebook Marketplace for a fraction of the purchase price. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that waste increases by 25% between Thanksgiving and New Year's. That's an extra 1 million tons of trash per week. A lot of that is wrapping paper and packaging. But a meaningful chunk is the gifts themselves, or at least the gifts within 12 to 24 months. We're not just destroying economic value, we're creating literal landfill waste in the process. Here's where someone usually jumps in with the economic stimulus argument. But Alex, all that spending is good for the economy. It creates jobs. It keeps retail workers employed. Stores depend on holiday sales. And sure, that's technically true. Holiday shopping does represent a significant portion of annual retail revenue. But that's an argument for spending, not for inefficient spending. If we gave people cash instead of sweaters they don't want, they'd still spend that money. They'd just spend it on things they actually need or value. The economic activity would still happen. We'd just eliminate the waste in the middle. The jobs would still exist. The stores would still operate. We'd just have fewer returns, less landfill waste, and better matching between consumer preferences and purchases. The economy would actually function more efficiently, which typically leads to better outcomes, not worse. Now let me show you the alternatives, because I'm not just here to tear down the system without offering solutions. There are ways to give gifts that preserve value instead of destroying it. Let's start with the obvious one: cash. Yes, I know, it feels weird. We've been programmed to think cash is lazy or impersonal. Get over it. Cash has a deadweight loss of exactly 0%. The recipient gets 100% of the value you intended to transfer. They can use it for whatever they actually need, whether that's paying down debt, building an emergency fund, or buying the specific thing they've been wanting. You're giving them optionality instead of guessing. And if you're worried about it feeling impersonal, write a thoughtful card. The emotional content is in the message, not the medium. Gift cards are the next step down. They're about 90 to 95% efficient, depending on fees and breakage rates. Breakage is the industry term for unredeemed value. Every year, billions of dollars in gift cards go unused. People lose them, forget about them, or can't figure out what to buy with a $25 balance at a store they never shop at. So gift cards introduce some inefficiency, but they're still way better than a random physical item. The key is to give gift cards to places the recipient actually uses. A Starbucks card for someone who doesn't drink coffee is just as useless as a sweater in the wrong size. But an Amazon card, a Visa prepaid card, those are basically cash with slightly more friction. Then there are experience gifts: concert tickets, restaurant reservations, a membership to a museum or streaming service. These can be highly efficient if you know the recipient's preferences well. The deadweight loss on experiences tends to be lower than physical goods because experiences are consumed immediately and don't generate clutter. Plus, research shows that experiential purchases generate more lasting happiness than material ones. People remember the concert or the dinner. They forget the scented candle. The risk with experience gifts is the same as any gift. If you pick wrong, you're forcing someone to spend their time doing something they don't want to do, which might actually be worse than giving them a sweater they don't wear. For kids, here's a strategy that almost nobody uses but absolutely should. Give them investments. Open a custodial brokerage account. Buy shares of an index fund. Contribute to their 529 college savings plan. $100 invested at age 5 with average market returns becomes roughly $1,000 by the time they're 18. That's a 900% return. Compare that to a $100 toy that gets played with for 3 weeks and then buried in the toy box. Which gift actually demonstrates that you care about the child's future? The immediate gratification toy or the seed capital for their adult life? I know which one I'd choose. And yes, the 5-year-old isn't going to understand or appreciate the brokerage account on Christmas morning. But that's fine. Give them one fun present to open, something they'll actually enjoy, and then do the investment as a boring adult gift that pays off later. Charitable donations in someone's name can work, but tread carefully here. This is really only appropriate if you know the recipient is passionate about a specific cause. Donating to an animal shelter because your aunt likes dogs is fine if she's mentioned that charity specifically. But surprising someone with a charitable donation to a cause they've never expressed interest in? That's just you imposing your values on their gift. It's better than a sweater they won't wear, but it's not as good as giving them the cash and letting them choose their own charity. The point of a gift should be to increase the recipient's utility, not to make yourself feel good about your moral choices. There's one more alternative that deserves attention. Just don't give gifts. Have the conversation. Establish with friends, extended family, and adult relatives that you're opting out of the gift exchange. This is harder than it sounds because you're fighting against decades of social conditioning. But here's the thing. Most people are secretly relieved when someone else suggests ending the gift exchange. Everyone's doing it out of obligation. Nobody actually wants to spend 4 hours at the mall fighting crowds to buy stuff for people who don't need anything. But nobody wants to be the first one to say it because there's social risk in defecting from the norm, so be that person. Propose a no-gift Christmas or a one-gift per family maximum, or an adults-only cessation where you still do gifts for kids but not for each other. You'll be surprised how many people respond with, "Thank God someone finally said it." But if we know all this, if the economics clearly show that gift giving destroys wealth, why do we keep doing it? This is where we get into the deeper psychology. Because the deadweight loss research has been public for over 30 years. Joel Waldfogel didn't hide this information. He wrote an entire book called Scroogenomics explaining it in detail. And yet, nothing has changed. Americans still spend $900 billion every December, still destroy $180 billion in value, still go into debt to buy things people don't want. The answer is social signaling theory. Gifts aren't about transferring value. They're about demonstrating relationships. When you give someone a physical present, something you picked out specifically for them, you're signaling that you thought about them, that you invested time and effort, that you understand their preferences. The efficiency of the transfer is irrelevant because efficiency isn't the goal. The goal is to prove that you care enough to engage in an inefficient process. It's the economic equivalent of a peacock's tail. Peacock tails are horribly inefficient. They're heavy, they're bright, they make it harder to escape predators. But that's the point. The peacock is signaling, look how healthy and strong I am that I can survive despite carrying around this ridiculous tail. Gift giving is the same thing. You're signaling, look how much I value this relationship. I'm willing to waste resources to prove it. And that's not entirely crazy. Relationships do have value. Social bonds matter. If giving a slightly inefficient gift strengthens a relationship, maybe the total value created exceeds the deadweight loss. Maybe the $20 you destroy in economic value generates $30 worth of social capital. The problem is, we have no way to measure that trade-off accurately. And my strong suspicion is that most gift exchanges don't pass that test. The obligatory gift swap with your coworkers? That's probably net negative value when you factor in the time, stress, and money involved. The gifts for your immediate family that you see regularly and communicate with constantly, those might actually be worth the inefficiency because they're reinforcing bonds that matter. But we don't make these calculations consciously. We just default to gifts for everyone because that's the script society handed us. There's also a reciprocity trap at work. Sociologist studies show that humans have a deep psychological need to reciprocate. When someone gives you something, you feel obligated to give something back. And that obligation is so strong that it overrides rational cost-benefit analysis. This is why free samples work in marketing. You try the cheese at Costco, now you feel weird not buying the cheese even though you didn't want cheese 60 seconds ago. Christmas gifts operate on the same principle but scaled up. Your aunt gives your kid a present. Now you feel obligated to give her kid a present. She gives you a present next year. Now you're locked in. The gift exchange becomes a permanent feature of the relationship, and neither party can exit without feeling like they're violating a social contract. You're stuck in a loop of mutual inefficiency that neither person particularly enjoys but both feel compelled to maintain. The retail industry has spent billions of dollars reinforcing these psychological patterns. Advertising campaigns that equate love with purchasing. Movies where the thoughtful gift saves the relationship. Magazine articles about finding the perfect present. Black Friday and Cyber Monday creating artificial urgency and scarcity. The entire commercial apparatus of Christmas is designed to suppress the rational cost-benefit voice in your head and replace it with emotional appeals. You don't want to be the person who showed up empty-handed. You don't want to disappoint your children. You don't want to look cheap. And those emotional triggers are powerful enough to override the math. Even when you know, intellectually, that the sweater you're buying is going to generate less value than its cost, you buy it anyway because the social cost of not buying it feels higher. Here's the hard truth that might sting a little. For most people, Christmas gifts are a poverty trap disguised as a celebration. You're taking money you should be saving, investing, or using to pay down debt, and you're converting it into clutter and obligation. And because everyone around you is doing the same thing, you can't opt out without risking social judgment. So you stay on the hamster wheel. You spend money you don't have every December. You start January with credit card debt and a house full of stuff nobody wanted. You spend the next 11 months trying to recover financially. And then November rolls around and you do it all over again. This is not wealth building. This is wealth destruction with wrapping paper and ribbons. If you're serious about building financial security, at some point you have to step off that wheel. You have to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. You have to be willing to be the person who suggests alternatives. You have to be willing to tolerate the social awkwardness of opting out of traditions that don't serve you. And yes, there will be pushback. Someone will accuse you of being cheap or unromantic or ruining Christmas. Let them. Because the alternative is spending the rest of your life destroying wealth every December to avoid disappointing people who probably don't care that much anyway. The math is clear. The economics are undeniable. Christmas gifts, as currently practiced by most Americans, represent one of the largest voluntary wealth destruction events in the economy. 900 billion spent, 180 billion destroyed, every single year. And we keep doing it because we've confused social signaling with value creation. We've let retail marketing override rational decision-making. We've trapped ourselves in reciprocity loops we don't know how to exit. But you're not trapped. You can choose differently. You can give cash and gift cards. You can shift to experiences. You can invest for the kids. You can donate to meaningful causes. You can opt out of adult gift exchanges entirely. You can have the conversation that everyone secretly wants to have, but nobody wants to start. And when someone pushes back, when someone accuses you of being a Scrooge, you can explain the deadweight loss. You can walk them through the math. You can ask them if they'd rather have a sweater they'll never wear or $50 to spend on whatever they actually need. Most people, when confronted with the actual choice, will pick the cash. They just needed permission to admit it. Your future financially secure self is looking back at this moment. They're watching you stand in that Target line, cart full of obligation purchases, credit card in hand, and they're begging you to put it all back, to walk out of the store, to send a thoughtful message instead, to have the hard conversation about changing the tradition. Because every dollar you save from the Christmas wealth destruction machine is a dollar that can go toward the things that actually matter. Emergency fund, debt payoff, retirement savings, investment accounts that compound for decades. The choice isn't between being generous and being cheap. The choice is between performative generosity that destroys value and actual generosity that preserves it. Between gifts that signal obligation and gifts that create optionality. Between staying trapped in a system you know doesn't work and having the courage to do something different. The deadweight loss of Christmas isn't just an economic curiosity. It's a perfect case study in how social pressure, marketing, and tradition combine to make us do things we know are irrational. And once you see it, once you really understand the mechanism, you can't unsee it. Every gift you give from now on, you'll be thinking about the value transfer, about whether the recipient would actually pay what you're paying, about whether there's a better way to demonstrate that you care. And that awareness, that moment of clarity where the math becomes visible, that's the beginning of opting out. That's the first step towards spending your money in ways that actually build wealth instead of destroying it. The system counts on you not thinking about it too hard. It counts on you following the script because everyone else is following the script. But you're not everyone else. You're the person who watched this far into a video about the economics of Christmas, which means you're already thinking differently. The only question now is whether you're willing to act differently, whether you're willing to be the person who changes the tradition. Your wallet, your future self, and honestly probably your gift recipients are all hoping the answer is yes.